And today we get to welcome Donna Cottrell, our current Rear Admiral for the 9th District. She assumed the role of commander just over a year ago in June of 2019. And in this role, she serves as the Senior Coast Guard Commander for, you may have thought it was just Lake Erie, but it is all of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway. It encompasses 8 states, a 1,500-mile international border, a workforce of 6,000 active duty, reserve, civilian, and auxiliary. And Rear Admiral, it's good to see that there are 3 people who survived this role, so there is a light at the end of the tunnel. We know that you'll join them at some point. And previous to this, she held a role serving as director of the Joint Interagency Task Force. That is the U.S. Pacific Command, and she was the executive agent for, listen to this, executing on the Department of Defense counter-drug activities, disrupting transnational criminal organizations that threaten U.S. interests. Thank you for that amazing service. She is a native of Wellington, Ohio, so this is a homecoming for her. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Legion of Merit, twice, Meritorious Service several times, Global War on Terrorism, and Defense Superior Service Medal. And that's just a few of the many awards that she has been credited with. And Rachel, take note, she is a proud alumna of Ohio University. So with that, Rear Admiral, thank you for making time to join us today. We look forward to hearing your comments.
Well, thanks very much, Mary Ann. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and thanks for that nice introduction. And you have a way of making even sort of boring things sound really more exciting than I thought they were. So thanks for that. I'm really happy to be here and back in the Buckeye State, as Mary Ann mentioned. And this was my first choice coming out of Hawaii. A lot of people ask me, you know, you left Hawaii and you came to Ohio, and I'm like, yes. Now, that's usually people who aren't from Ohio that don't get it, but having been from Ohio, it was great to be back. So my goal today is to talk about the Coast Guard missions on the Great Lakes, what we do and how we do it, and also just discuss a little bit of some of the challenges that we're facing right now and how we're dealing with them. So as Mary Ann alluded to, you know, the Great Lakes are unique. You know, there's 5 of them, and the way you can remember it is the homes, you know, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. They're the shared waters of 2 nations, us and Canada. The 8 states border the Great Lakes, 2 Canadian provinces, several tribal communities, encompasses 6,700 miles of coastline and 1,500 miles of border with Canada, which would be equivalent to basically Brownsville, Texas to San Diego, California. So that's a lot of border. And then something I learned since I got here was the Great Lakes also comprise 21% of the entire world's fresh drinking water. That's a lot of drinking water. And so the Great Lakes are really what I consider a national treasure that not many people know about unless you're from the Midwest. It's also a great economic driver in that, you know, the U.S. and Canada, in 2018, we did about $700 billion of trade with Canada. So a lot of goods and commodities travel on the Great Lakes. District 9, so there's actually 5 districts in the Atlantic area. The Coast Guard's divided up into 2 areas, the Atlantic and Pacific. And then within the Atlantic area, there are 5 districts. So the 1st district, the 5th district, the 7th district, and the 8th district, and us are the 9th district. There used to be 2 and 4. I don't know what happened to them. I think they went away before I even came in the Coast Guard, but we just keep these numbers. And then under Great Lakes, I have 5 sectors. 4 sectors, and they're commanded by a captain. Each of them is commanded by a captain. And so I have one in Milwaukee, which is called Sector Lake Michigan, one in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, one in Detroit, Michigan, and one in Buffalo. I think I said Lake Michigan was in Michigan. It's actually in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Talked a little bit already about how many people are in the district. The other thing that's kind of interesting to note is the span, you know, the west-east span. So from Duluth, Minnesota to Messina, New York. So it's pretty huge. And then we have 47 small boat stations. So a lot of people, that's, especially on the Great Lakes, that's what people think about when they think about the Coast Guard. So places like Station Cleveland, right out at the moorings, or Station Marblehead, if you go out onto the Put in Bay and some of the islands there, Station Marblehead services that area. So we have 47 of those stations throughout the district. So to give that some context, District 7, which is all of Florida, all of Georgia and South Carolina and Puerto Rico, they have 19 stations all, total. So we have more than double what, that southern, that's a very large district also. And then we have 2 air stations, one in Detroit, one in Traverse City. And then we have 10 cutters. A lot of people don't know that, so that we call ships, we call them cutters. And the Mackinac is the largest ship. They're out of Sheboygan, Michigan. They're the big red one. It's, pretty well known. And then we have 2 seagoing buoy tenders and 6 ice-breaking tugs and one 100-foot inland buoy tender. And all of those cutters, their main jobs are ice-breaking and aids to navigation. Managing the aids to navigation, there's over 1,200 buoys and other kinds of aids to navigation throughout the Great Lakes. And basically, it's like telling people which way they should be on the channel and not run into these, shoal water, and it's basically traffic control on the lakes. We have 2 seasons. We call them the hard water season and the soft water season. So as you might imagine, the hard water season is when we ice up. Now, most years, the Lake Erie would ice over. And then parts of Lake Michigan and sometimes Ontario. Superior doesn't normally ice over, but the locks up there will, the Straits of Mackinac. And then right now we're in the soft water season, which is search and rescue, search and rescue, search and rescue. So very, very busy between Memorial Day and Labor Day. We have more cases between those holidays than most districts have all year. Just to give you couple different numbers. We track normally about 1,500 to 1,600 cases during that time period. And just last weekend, we had 100 cases. We were really, really busy last year. I'll talk a little bit more about why we're so busy right now. And then we have the shoulder seasons, the fall and the spring. So in the fall, the cutters are busy taking the buoys out of the water before the ice sets in. And then in the spring, after everything melts, we put them back in. So that's kind of a little bit on what the district, comprises. One thing that's interesting to know, or really important to note about the Great Lakes, is that it's a very complex maritime transportation system. So it's interconnected, interdependent. There's waterways, there's lakes, there's rivers, there's ports, and there's locks. So there's locks. There's the Welland Canal, which is in Canada. There's St. Lawrence Seaway, which we're familiar with. And then up in Sault Ste. Marie, the Poe locks. And I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Lots of cargo moves on the Great Lakes, moving iron ore to various, mills and facilities. About 160 metric tons were moved per year. And one of the things that is important to note about the moving cargo on the water is it's very fuel efficient, 25% more fuel efficient than other modes. So if you're moving 75,000 tons of cargo on the water, that would be the equivalent of 2,700 18-wheelers or 7 100-car trains. So that's a lot of, in terms of carbon footprint, there's a lot there. We also support, when I say we, I mean the Great Lakes, supports about 250,000 jobs in U.S. and Canada. And we have really important partnerships with Canada, because there isn't really, you can look at a chart and say, oh, there's a line, there's a purple line between us and Canada. But when it comes to, search and rescue or ice breaking even, there isn't really a boundary. And so we work very closely with our Canadian partners and our partners with the St. Lawrence Seaway in managing this entire system. Now the infrastructure, which would be locks and ports and piers and those kinds of things, like a lot of things in the United States, is aging. And then there's some places that are very critical. So the locks, are choke points. Specifically, the Lock up in Sault Ste. Marie is, there's only one lock there that can handle a 1,000-foot lake group between the Lake Superior and Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. The other thing that's interesting is, so it's a national security issue, but the good news is that they've got a new contract in place, a new build to build another lock to have some redundancy, and then that's expected to complete in about 8 to 9 years. So that's good news, and that means a lot more people up there in the Great Lakes. So a little bit about the environment. I talked about the drinking water. So provides drinking water for 40 million North Americans. And you know, how do we protect this very important environmental treasure? Well, it's a multi-pronged approach. So we start with prevention. We want to prevent bad things from happening. That's like the first thing, right? So vessel facilities inspections. We check out ballast water because we don't want invasive species coming into the Great Lakes, which some of them already here, came in through various means before the 80s. But when ships take on ballast water, let's say in Europe, to come across the ocean, they have to swap that out so that whatever kind of critters are in there, they swap them out, they give them a saltwater shock, which kills most of them. But this ballast water treatment facilities are required on any ships that are coming outside of the Great Lakes into the lakes. And then of course, response. You know, we have, if something bad happens, then we have plans already in place, contingency plans, we have partnerships, and then we have exercise. We do a lot of exercises, especially oil spill type exercises. So current challenges. Everyone's probably aware that we're at record lake levels. We were record lake levels across all 5 lakes last year. This year we have a little bit of relief, except in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. We expect those lakes to actually exceed the levels that they were last year. And then this affects rip currents. We see a lot more swimmers get caught up in rip currents. There's things on the water that were maybe not submerged a couple of years ago that are now submerged, so people run into them. And then our very own stations are impacted by flooding. You know, we've got stations that have to kind of pump out their basements periodically, depending on where the winds are coming from. So that's affecting us. COVID, well, within the Coast Guard, within the 9th District, we've had low numbers of positives, although I will say right now, because of, you know, the surge here in Ohio, we've got some increased numbers of people that are well, a few people that are positive, but more people that are being quarantined because of exposure. But it hasn't really affected our ability to respond and our operational posture as far as what the people see out in the water. And we have some strict protocols for ships that are coming into the outside the system. There's a 14-day quarantine for ships coming, you know, foreign flag ships coming into the Great Lakes system. And if they're coming to a U.S. port, if they come in before those 14 days, they can't go off the ship. But most of them wait anyway. And now it's kind of like, to be honest with you, they're probably more worried about coming into the United States than we are worried about them. But so talk a little bit about the number of SAR cases. Just a lot of people are buying boats. I talked to a friend of mine last week, and he said he's got a buddy that runs a boat dealership who had to let his help go because he doesn't have any inventory. They're all sold out. And so they're all out there on the water right now, and a lot of inexperienced people. Just so the number of people out there and the number of inexperienced people out there is one of the main reasons for the increase in our search and rescue cases. And then the last thing I'll talk about is, you know, the civil unrest has had an impact within the Coast Guard, just in terms of, you know, you can't ignore it. You can't pretend like it's not there. District 9, Cleveland, we have a pretty good diversity on our staff, but, you know, up in the northern parts of Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota, not as much. So we've been having conversations with those folks up there, and just, you know, we want to make sure that we have a culture of respect, and we have some training that we instituted even before all this happened, and kind of a deck plate training on how to have difficult conversations and how to reach out to people. So as far as leadership, the Coast Guard culture is a unique culture in that we empower leaders at a very low level, our tactical leaders. So that man or woman that you see driving those small boats that are doing those rescues, you know, they're probably 22, 23 years old. They've been in the Coast Guard 4 or 5 years, but they have an incredible amount of responsibility that we give them. We push a lot of responsibility down. We also have a culture of bias for action, but we try to balance that with ongoing risk management. We call it operational risk management. So before we even go out on a case, we look at like, what's the weather? What's the planning? How complex is this? And a lot of that's done before the SAR alarm goes off. But then some of it has to be ongoing. We had a case recently that was really interesting. The crew was, I think they were just coming back from I think they were just coming on duty and they hadn't put on their law enforcement gear yet, but they got a call of a woman who fell in the water pretty close to them. And they just opted to go without their law enforcement gear, which is not normal, but in this case was the right decision because they got to her like literally just in time and pulled her, she was going under. So life saved there. So those kinds of risk decisions are made all the time, every day. And we kind of have to, we expect people to make risk decisions with maybe not all the information. And then from a staff standpoint, what we do is we provide top cover. We advocate for our units, you know, to the next higher level. That's my main job. It's like, I want to remove the obstacles that are out there from the people trying to get their job done. So from a personal standpoint, I consider myself an operational leader, whereas the people that work for me, the sector commanders, are tactical leaders. I try not to be that 500-mile screwdriver that everybody complains about. I have a lot of trust and confidence in my sector commanders and the officers in charge. I do travel a lot. I think that's really important well, it's been a little bit different with COVID, but I think the travel piece and just getting, you know, in-person meetings and talking to people face to face is absolutely essential for me to know what's really going on, because another piece of our culture is you know, the officers in charge, sometimes they don't complain about stuff. They just want, you know, hey, I'm going to handle it. I got it, right? And then you get there and you find out like, well, when's the last time you could use your basement because there's water in your basement? So I get the reality when I go visit these places, and I really like to talk to our junior folks and recognize them. And then, you know, the other piece, I guess the key that I've, over the years in terms of leadership, one of the things is just listening, the ability to listen and listen to the staff, listen to the minority opinions. And I find that I have to make more and more of an effort to get it, just, you know, the more senior I get. So you have to seek it out. You have to have trusted advisors, or what I call trusted agents. And you have to make an effort to be approachable, and you have to have a lot of patience, because sometimes it just takes longer for people to get to the point. Not everybody. People like Lauren, he gets to the point right away, but most people, it takes them a little bit longer. So I'm going to stop there and take any questions that you have.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And we have had quite a few questions come in.
Okay.
So to start, with the increase in boating and the varying issues that you've seen with the experience levels of boaters, how has that impacted your work? And as you think about COVID, how are you working to keep both the boaters and your staff safe?
So I'll answer the last question first. So all of our crews wear, you know, ND5 masks, gloves, eye protection. They won't board a vessel without a compelling reason to do so. I mean, obviously, if somebody's drowning, you know, this is a risk-based decision, right? What's the risk? Well, the risk of them drowning is greater than the risk of them catching COVID right now. So we're going to prevent them from drowning, or the risk of their vessel sinking, you know, those kinds of things. So they wear the proper protective gear. They ask people questions. You know, if there's time, they can ask people questions like, hey, do you have any exposure to COVID? And then the impact to our units is just, they're just busier, right? Now, in terms of their ability to operate in a COVID environment, they are doing what we call them blue-orange crews. So they'll have duty crews, and they won't they won't operate at the same time to keep separation. So if one person does become infected, it doesn't take down the whole unit. It only takes down a portion of the unit. So I hope that answers the question.
And given COVID and all that's going on right now, how will the Coast Guard respond to big national events like Katrina or Deepwater Horizon? Is there any special planning going on that considers the intersection of a national mobilization versus the virus?
We've been talking a lot about hurricanes with my boss, the Land Area Commander, and yeah, it's definitely on the forefront of everyone's mind. Typically, District 9 is what we call a donor district in terms of helping, funnel resources, people. Not so much. Well, we are sending a cutter down there, and sometimes helicopters. And so what my goal in that is to keep people as healthy as possible so that they can deploy. But we do think COVID's gonna have a major impact on any sort of hurricane or natural disaster, because we don't think people are gonna be good. They're not gonna readily evacuate because where do you go, right? It's just more difficult to figure out where you're gonna go. So we do expect, if there is a hurricane that makes landfall, that there'll be a pretty big response to that, in terms of our resources, in terms of boats and helicopters having to go in there.
So what are the important ways that we collaborate with the Canadian Coast Guard, and what impact does the closing of the Canadian border have on your work?
Well, the biggest impact has been just the meetings that we normally have with them in person. We're having to do everything virtually because they're not traveling. We work closely with, we don't work as close with the Coast Guard. I mean, we do with icebreaking, but with law enforcement and with the Coast Guard with search and rescue. But with law enforcement, we work with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and they operate their own boats, just like our small boats. So we just did a border operation in Lake Erie over the weekend, and so they stayed on their side and we stayed on our side. But we talk to them on the radio. We have a lot of good communications with them for maritime events. Like we get a lot of what we call unsanctioned events up in the Detroit area, and so the Canadians are very involved. They have resources out there along with our DHS partners too.
So we have someone who works in the steel field, and knowing that steel is such a backbone of the North American manufacturing supply chain, and knowing that there's been some challenges in the past with icebreaking, is the Coast Guard looking at providing more icebreaking assets for the lakes?
Not at this point. I know there's been discussion about a second Mackinac kind of thing, and I know it's still in discussion. We're building more polar security cutters, so there may be an opportunity there to funnel one of those to the Great Lakes, but I don't think we're there yet. Our biggest need really over another Mackinac is a recapitalization of our tugs, our icebreaking tugs, because we have more of them and they do a lot of work. Of course, the heavy icebreaker is the one like the Mackinac that works in Lake Superior with the thicker ice. But our 140s are, I think they're about 40 years old, so that we need to recapitalize those too.
So as you think about collaborating across 8 states, 2 provinces, tribal lands that you've mentioned, what are some particular leadership techniques that you have found to be particularly effective in managing those collaborations?
Well, prior COVID was in-person meetings. And I count a lot on my sector commanders because, it depends on what level you're at, right? We try to do things, at equivalent levels. So my sector commanders work with their equivalents in the different agencies or states. But if we're going to deal with somebody, like a senator or a congressperson or a governor, then I would be the person that would be talking to them. But for a tactical level, it would be more my sector commanders. And they are the captain of the port for their area, so they have a certain amount of authority to make decisions, maritime decisions, for their particular sectors. But I would say, those in-person meetings are invaluable.
And so much of the work can be very serious and very heavy. So what are some things that bring joy to your role?
Oh, that's actually pretty easy. I like going into work. I mean, I'm not at work today, as you can probably tell. We had to, because of the rise in cases that we're having locally, and then we had a couple in the federal building, not Coast Guard people, but other people. We went to our own kind of blue-orange team. So I'm working from home today, and the chief of staff is in the office. But for me, it's just the people. I like to tell people the mission got me in the Coast Guard, but the people keep me in the Coast Guard. And that's true still today. I just love coming to work and working with Coast Guard people. And the road trips, Austin's on the phone. We get a lot of miles, me and Lieutenant Fulmer and the Master Chief, and sometimes Chief of Staff, and those are always, great. If you have a good staff, you can do long car trips. It's enjoyable.
We have time for one more question, and there are a considerable number of people on the call today that are very interested to learn more about the banjo that is in your background.
It's funny, I just moved that today. Like, it wasn't there before. I'm like, I gotta find some place to put this. There was a trash can there. I'm like, I don't want that there. So I play the banjo. I've been playing for about 6 years. And I play mainly Scruggs style, bluegrass. So, it's a lot of fun. It really is.
Well, Rear Admiral, thank you so much for sharing your time today. And as one of the comments that just came in, we are lucky to have you on the Great Lakes, and thank you for all that you do.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for everybody.
Yeah, and with that, I'm going to welcome back Mary Ann.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And Rear Admiral, thank you for making time to join us today and to educate us about the amazing work that you do to keep all of us safe on the Great Lakes. It's a lot of responsibility you shoulder, so we're very grateful.